Deep in the frozen woods of North America, something ancient stirs. A creature that has haunted indigenous legends for centuries. A creature said to embody hunger, greed, and the endless cold. The Wendigo. Stories of the Wendigo come from Algonquian-speaking peoples of the northern forests. They spoke of a tall, emaciated monster with glowing eyes, sharp claws, and the twisted antlers of a beast. It is said to move silently through the trees, always watching, always waiting. Some say it is a spirit of winter. Others insist it is something far worse. A predator that feeds on human flesh. But the most terrifying part of the Wendigo legend is not just what it looks like, but how it is born. Folklore tells us that when a person resorts to cannibalism in the deep snows of winter, when hunger and madness take over, they can transform into something no longer human. Forever cursed to roam the forests, consumed by endless hunger, never satisfied, always hunting. Imagine walking alone through a frozen forest at night. The snow crunches beneath your boots, your breath clouds the air, and then you hear it, a whisper, a growl, a scream in the distance that doesn't sound like any animal you've ever known. The Wendigo does not chase you outright, stalks you slowly, patiently, until the moment you realize you are no longer the hunter, but the prey. Tonight, we will step into that forest. We'll uncover chilling legends, true encounters, and survival stories that have been whispered for generations. Tales that blur the line between folklore and terrifying reality. And whether you believe the Wendigo is a myth, a spirit, or a real creature still roaming the woods today, one thing is certain. These stories will make you think twice before venturing into the wilderness alone. Stay with me until the end, because the final story is one you will never forget. The story of the Wendigo begins centuries ago, within the oral traditions of Algonquian-speaking peoples across North America. From the Cree and Ojibwe in the north, to the Innu and the Saulteaux, these communities carried with them chilling warnings about a creature born from the deepest hungers of winter. To speak of it was to invite fear, yet to ignore it was even more dangerous. The Wendigo was not imagined as a simple beast of the forest. It was a symbol of greed, of selfishness, and of the terrible choices made when survival was at stake. In times of famine, when food was scarce and snow buried every path, it was said that those who resorted to eating human flesh would be cursed. They would lose their humanity, and in its place, something unnatural would awaken. They would become the Wendigo. Accounts describe the Wendigo as a towering figure, impossibly thin. Its skin stretched tightly over its bones, lips torn and ragged from hunger. In some traditions, it is said to have the skull and antlers of a stag, its glowing eyes burning like embers in the darkness. Others describe a gaunt, humanoid creature, standing taller than any man, with claws sharp enough to rend through flesh and bone. Its body is said to be frozen, covered in ice, as if it carries winter wherever it walks. But the true terror of the Wendigo lies not in its appearance, but in its hunger. It is said to be forever starving, no matter how much it consumes. The more it eats, the hungrier it becomes. A hunger without end. A hunger that drives it to stalk the living through forests and frozen lakes, waiting for the moment its prey is too weak, too lost, too hopeless to escape. And yet, perhaps the most horrifying part of this legend is that the Wendigo may not always come from outside. The stories tell us that any person, if driven far enough by hunger, desperation, or greed, can transform into one. To taste human flesh in the dead of winter is to risk losing your soul, cursed to wander the earth forever as a creature of endless appetite. In some communities, this warning was more than myth, it was survival. During long winters, when starvation loomed, families whispered these stories to remind each other that no matter how desperate things became, there were lines that could never be crossed. For to cross them was to invite the Wendigo into your very being. Even early European settlers, hearing these tales from indigenous guides and neighbors, recorded them with fear. Trappers and missionaries in the 17th and 18th centuries wrote of strange figures in the forest, of men driven mad by hunger, and of warnings never to travel alone in the deep snows. For those who lived close to the wilderness, The Wendigo was not just a story. It was a shadow that haunted the treeline. And over time, the legend only grew. Some described the Wendigo as a spirit that could possess a person, twisting their mind and body until they became something monstrous. Others believed the Wendigo was a physical creature, roaming the woods, hunting those foolish enough to venture too far into the cold. But make no mistake, these are not just old legends told around firelight. For centuries, people across the northern forests have claimed to see something out there. Something with glowing eyes watching from the trees. Something that leaves tracks too large for any wolf, too strange for any bear. Something that should not exist. Modern encounters suggest the Wendigo is not gone. It still leaves its mark in the frozen silence of the wilderness. It was late winter, deep in the frozen wilderness of northern Canada. A lone hunter had set out in search of game. He knew the woods well. He had hunted these forests his entire life. But on that night, something felt different. The forest was unnervingly still, the air sharp and brittle with cold, every sound amplified in the silence. As he moved deeper into the trees, he noticed tracks in the snow. They were large, far larger than any wolf, and broader than the paws of a bear. Yet they didn't match the rounded shape of an animal's foot. These prints were elongated, almost human-like, but distorted, as if belonging to something stretched beyond nature. He crouched to study them, unease prickling the back of his neck. Following the tracks, the hunter soon realized they seemed to circle the forest, weaving in and out of clearings, as if the creature that made them was not traveling, but stalking, watching. And then he noticed something stranger still. Every time he paused, the woods seemed to pause with him. The crunch of snow in the distance would stop. The forest would fall silent. And when he moved again, the sound would return, just a little behind him. He told himself it was only the wind. The forest plays tricks on a man alone in the dark. But the deeper he went, the heavier the feeling became that he was not alone. He could see his breath hanging in the frozen air, each exhale clouding before his face. And then, he heard it. A whisper, soft, human-like, but no one was there. The voice had called his name. Panic surged through him. He spun around, eyes searching the treeline, but found nothing except the endless shadows of the pines. He gripped his rifle tighter, trying to steady his breathing. That's when he caught movement ahead. 2 faint pinpricks of light glowing through the dark. Eyes, watching him, unblinking. The eyes did not move like those of an animal. They were too high off the ground, too steady, and filled with a pale, unnatural light. He aimed his rifle, but his hands trembled. For several long moments, he and the creature remained locked in silence, the cold wind howling between them. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the eyes vanished. Gone. The hunter was left alone in the dark, his breath ragged, his instincts screaming at him to leave. He turned back toward the direction of his cabin, walking faster, then faster still. But all the way home, he heard it, soft footsteps in the snow, trailing him, never too close, never too far. He never saw the full creature. He never fired his rifle. But to this day, he swears that something followed him through those woods, matching his every step, never letting him leave its territory. And though he survived that night, he never returned to hunt alone again. In the summer of 1998, a group of college friends decided to spend a weekend camping in the forests of northern Minnesota. They were young, adventurous, and thought the idea of staying in the wilderness, far from towns or traffic, would be an escape from their busy lives. They pitched their tents near a lake, built a fire, and settled in for what they thought would be a peaceful night under the stars. But as the night grew darker, something began to change. At first, it was subtle. The usual nighttime chorus of crickets and owls seemed to fall silent, one sound after another, until the woods were unnervingly still. The friends noticed it, too, glancing at one another as the fire popped and hissed. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then came the sound, a low, mournful howl, drifting through the trees. At first, they laughed, convincing themselves it must be a wolf. But as the sound grew closer, it didn't resemble any animal they knew. It was too deep, too long, and layered with something almost human. Unease spread through the camp. Still, they told themselves it was nothing. Just nerves. Just the woods playing tricks. Later that night, while most of them slept, one camper lay awake, staring at the thin nylon walls of the tent. The fire had burned low, leaving only the glow of embers. That's when he heard it. The crunch of footsteps outside. Heavy, deliberate, slowly circling the tent. He whispered to his friends, waking them one by one. He whispered to his friends, waking them one by one. The group sat in silence, listening. And then, their tent was slashed open in a single motion. The fabric split apart, and a freezing wind rushed inside. Screams filled the night as the campers scrambled out into the dark. One of them never made it out. The survivors later described what they saw. A towering figure, gaunt and skeletal, its limbs impossibly long. From its head sprouted antlers like those of a stag, silhouetted against the pale moonlight. Its hands ended in claws, sharp enough to tear through canvas and flesh alike, and its eyes, glowing orange, piercing the dark. It moved with unnatural speed, vanishing into the trees before they could process what they had seen. When morning came, the authorities arrived. They searched the forest, combed through the campsite, and listened to the terrified accounts of the survivors. The official report was simple. They blamed wild animals. A bear, perhaps, or wolves. But the campers never accepted that explanation. They insisted that what they saw was no bear, no wolf, and no human being. To this day, when asked about that night, they tell the same story. The Wendigo had come for them. And if their story is true, it means that deep in the forests of Minnesota, the Wendigo still wanders, searching for its next victim. The Wendigo is terrifying not only because of what it is said to be, but also because of what it represents. For centuries, stories of the Wendigo have walked a fine line between folklore and psychology, myth and madness. And at the heart of this legend lies one of the most unsettling ideas in all of human history, the fear of becoming something monstrous yourself. Among the Algonquian peoples, the Wendigo was not only described as a physical creature, but also as a condition of the soul. It was said that those who committed cannibalism in times of great famine, or those who gave in to extreme greed and selfishness, could become Wendigos themselves. Their bodies would twist into tall, skeletal shapes, their hearts would freeze like ice, and their hunger would never be satisfied again. This belief became so powerful that European settlers recorded cases of what they called Wendigo psychosis. Men and women in remote villages claimed they were developing an uncontrollable craving for human flesh. They confessed their fears to tribal healers or local priests, terrified that they were turning into something inhuman. Some were restrained. Others were executed before they could harm their families. Historians today have written about these cases, describing them as cultural expressions of starvation and isolation. But for those who lived through it, Wendigo psychosis was not a metaphor. It was real, and the fear of transformation was worse than death. Imagine the long winters of the northern forests. Families snowed in for months at a time, supplies running low, children crying with hunger, the walls creaking from the weight of snow. Days of darkness with no sun to break the endless cold. In those moments, the mind begins to wander. Desperation grows. And out of that desperation rises the most forbidden thought of all, survival through flesh. In these stories, the Wendigo becomes more than just a beast in the woods. It becomes the shape of starvation, the embodiment of human desperation, the whisper that tempts a starving mind. It is a monster not only of the forest, but of the human heart. So what is more terrifying? A creature that stalks you through the trees? Or the possibility that deep inside, under the right conditions, you could become the monster yourself? And that is the true horror of the Wendigo. It is both out there in the woods, and in here, waiting in the dark corners of the human mind. Not all Wendigo stories come from deep in the wilderness or ancient history. Some are told by ordinary people, hunters, travelers, or locals, who swear they've come face to face with something they cannot explain. One such account comes from a man riding his snowmobile across the frozen trails of northern Canada late one winter night. The night was brutally cold, the kind of cold that freezes breath instantly, where even the moonlight seems sharp against the snow. The man had been traveling for hours along remote trails, guided only by the headlight of his snowmobile and the narrow track beneath him. He was alone, miles away from the nearest cabin or settlement. Then, without warning, the engine coughed and died. The headlight flickered out, plunging him into total darkness. He tried to restart the machine over and over, but the motor refused to catch. Soon, the only sounds were his own breathing and the wind moving through the trees. One such story describes an isolated indigenous village, tucked deep into the woods, days away from the nearest settlement. When neighboring hunters came to visit, they found something that has baffled people ever since. The village was silent, doors left swinging open, meals half-eaten still sitting on wooden tables, fires still smoldering, as though someone had stepped away only minutes before. But every single person was gone. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading out of the snow-packed paths, no bodies, no belongings taken, just emptiness, as though the people had simply vanished into the night. Whispers spread quickly. Locals said the Wendigo had come for them, that its hunger had grown too great to take just one victim, that the creature had consumed the village whole. Some claimed to have seen figures at the tree lean in the nights before, tall, gaunt silhouettes watching the cabins, waiting for the right moment to strike. Official explanations were never found. Theories ranged from disease to migration, but nothing explained the eerie details. The meals left uneaten, the fires left burning. It was as if the community had simply been swallowed by the forest itself. And so the story remains. Some say the Wendigo doesn't just hunt individuals. Sometimes, it consumes entire communities. From ancient folklore to chilling modern encounters, the Wendigo remains one of the most terrifying figures in horror history. For generations, its story has been told as both a warning and a reminder. Among the Algonquian peoples, it stood as a symbol of greed, hunger, and the dangers of turning against one's community. For early settlers, it was a monster said to stalk the wilderness. And for modern witnesses, it continues to appear as a shadow in the trees, a figure too tall, too thin, and too fast to be explained away. Across the centuries, the legend has never faded. It has only adapted, moving from campfire whispers to police reports, from warnings in oral traditions to stories shared in survival forums online. The question has never been answered fully. Was the Wendigo only ever a tale of morality, meant to keep people from falling into madness during long winters? Or does something still roam the frozen forests, waiting for those who wander too far into the dark? Are these just stories? Or is the Wendigo still hunting in the frozen forests tonight? Would you survive a Wendigo encounter? Share your thoughts in the comments, if you dare.